This evening I'm really pleased to be joined by Joe Chalk, who is the membership support for MUTA, who are the UK Trade Association representing Marquees, as well as Michelle Tayton, who is a board member for the EHA, the Event Hire Association. So what we're really keen to be talking about this evening is marquee weddings. We've had a very, very long time where marquees, particularly on private land, so within gardens, were seen as just the almost the impossible dream, that for some reason they were being completely overlooked in any government guidance, despite everyone within the marquee industry knowing that being outside and being in well ventilated spaces is a really, really safe place to be. So it would be really helpful for people to understand just why the government was so concerned in the beginning.
I think there are going to be varying views as to why the government hasn't recognised COVID secure wedding receptions in temporary structures. But I have a view, and that is a perceived lack of control. And I think it's important to mention that word perceived, because we often see these instances where there are floutings of the rules, and these unfortunate instances crop up in the news from time to time. One came this weekend, unfortunately, 30th birthday party fined, or the organisers of a 30th birthday party were fined £10,000 for having, I think, plus 50 numbers. And these snippets of events keep cropping up, Alison. And I say snippet because I think it is the minority, but the majority wish to do it right. The majority wish to abide by the rules on capacity, abide by the rules on social distancing, abide by the rules that the government set out. So I think these instances, which often make headline news, don't paint the industry in a very good way. And I think that's why we haven't been permitted up until step 3, which from step 3, there is now recognition.
Part of the concern was around the having one person there from the beginning to the end. So unlike a venue, and it's actually within the government guidance for weddings where they put their definitions at the very top. In fact, the guidance at the moment, they've put venue managers twice. They're so important, they've accidentally added them in twice. And that is somebody that, as well as working for the venue generally, they are in charge of assessment of the compliance of the guidelines. And of course, for a marquee wedding at home, there doesn't tend to be any one person. Obviously, if there's a wedding planner involved, you would assume that they would become the venue manager. Do you think that's going to become a requirement, that is needed? Is it going to be best practice that those are in place? How do you see that working?
I think quite possibly yes, because it then demonstrates that there is control. Now, normally in a sort of a pre-COVID world, we would have this relationship between a marquee company, a catering company, and a couple, or whoever it may be, and that works absolutely fine. The responsibility for a marquee company will generally be to provide a structure which is fit for purpose. Now, the couple or the people that are procuring that temporary structure or tents, they will be responsible for whatever happens within it. Now, I think where we're leaning to and where we're moving to is having this responsible person, which makes sure capacity levels are adhered to, make sure social distancing is adhered to, looks at the table and floor plans and that type of thing. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that we are leaning towards that route if it makes it generally safer, but also if it gets us back to work quicker. I mean, there's further guidance that's going to come in for phase 3, and I think we're all waiting for that, and we hope it comes very soon. But I can see that being one requirement, is that there is one responsible person that takes on that role of venue manager.
Do you see that person as being an independent wedding planner or an event management person, or do you see that as being somebody from the marquee supplier? I
think it could be any, Michelle. I think if there's going to be a wedding planner that's on hand for more of the sort of the, I guess if you want to call it live day, as opposed to the build-up and the breakdown, then that might make more sense. I've heard of some marquee companies, and this was way back to sort of where we were in August 2020, before we had any guidance. They took it upon themselves to say, right, we can stay here during the event. We'll put it up a day before. We'll come back the next day, and we'll come the day later to break it down. So I think I think it does depend, Michelle. I think if it could make sense if a wedding planner is going to be there on the day for them to take on that role. But I think it's someone that I personally feel it has benefits if that person is independent.
And at the moment, obviously, we don't know whether it's going to be a requirement, but what we're seeing in other parts of the event industry is that they're taking the government guidance as actually being the minimum standard in order to make sure that guests and all attendees at the event feel really safe and can really enjoy themselves. So this is probably going to be one of those measures that people are actually doing voluntarily, that they're saying, just as you would, you know, I'm wanting to use an event planner for my marquee wedding to make sure everything runs smoothly throughout the day. You'd be saying, actually, I want to have a COVID monitor there, a COVID angel, whatever they're going to be called, to just make sure that all of my guests understand what they should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the great thing about using one of our members or any reputable event hire company is that they will have their own COVID safe working protocols in place, because many of them have been working, albeit not necessarily in events, but they have been working, you know, it might be at testing stations or vaccination stations. So they have been operating, and they're operating well within the guidelines, and like you say, extended to the guidelines. But having one person, one point of contact on the day who can help schedule deliveries, you know, cleaning of toilets, and so that is taken away from the bride and groom, is massively beneficial.
Jo, you mentioned that everyone is wanting to get it right, and I don't, you know, we can't agree more than that. And I think with some of the guidance has been incredibly confusing. It's really hard to get it right. We desperately want to avoid those. It's such a hefty fine, that £10,000 fine.
Yes.
And so just to run through where we are at the moment. So based on the rules in England, at the moment in Tier 2, what is and isn't allowed?
Unfortunately, we're not allowed in private settings at the moment. So we can't have marquee weddings in private settings. To be quite honest, I think we come back to the instance that I mentioned earlier, that we are seeing these snippets of things or snippets of bad press, which has meant that we are pushed back into step 3. But sadly, at the moment, we cannot have these wedding receptions in private settings. And now you could have, and you may be able to support this, Alison, you could have a venue with a temporary structure linked to that. And I appreciate that's slightly different to what we're talking about today with sort of generally private settings. But it could be that you're at a hotel or a licensed venue where there is a tent there, and there's all the protocols in place already. I didn't know if you had anything to add to that, Alison.
Yeah, so I would agree at the moment. They can be used, it's outdoor receptions only at the moment, but they have allowed marquees at COVID secure venues to be classed as outdoors as long as 50% of the walls are missing. So the thing to bear in mind is the fact that can be, that's the only gathering. So you couldn't have, at the moment it is only 15 anyway, but you can't have 15 in one marquee and then another marquee on the grounds of the same venue with another 15, however far apart those two marquees are. That is the maximum number per wedding, not in each marquee. For step 3, where the regulations change to, first of all, it is 30, and receptions can be in any COVID secure indoor venue, or outdoors. So, and the devil is always in the detail in these guidelines. And at the moment, while we're waiting for that step 3 guidance, what we don't know is whether that's still going to be the sides on the marquees. We know that marquees are going to be allowed, but is it that they're being allowed as those outdoor venues still? So, so sides up. Does that matter at that time of year? Are people able to keep warm enough if you're missing 50% of the walls?
I think we're all cold at the moment when we're sitting in a pub garden or anything like that. But so I think we're gradually going to move into warmer weather. So I think for the temporary structure industry, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Really, but as we get towards the winter months, you can still heat the space with having the walls off. You can have the sort of patio style heaters that are directed that you've seen in a lot of the beer gardens and things at the minute. So
actually the patio style heaters are probably the answer, aren't they, for the summer? Because as you say, those are working very, very well in completely open pub gardens at the moment, as opposed to the blower heaters that we're perhaps more familiar with from winter marquees. Assuming that from 21st of June we get that green light that we can go ahead with unrestricted weddings in private gardens, rented fields, as well as in the grounds of COVID secure venues. What's the demand going to look like, and is the industry going to cope with that?
It relies on a few things really, and I think firstly it's working together. We've put out a few calls to our membership just to make sure that we work together more, because we've now got lots of meters of tents out at the King's Arms around the corner, and we may not be able to get that tent back in time to supply Mrs. Miggin's wedding at the start of August. So I think working together is the first point I would make. The second point I would make is that I think, tragically, there has been a few companies that have sadly gone under in the last 12 months. But I think as a general point, our sector is extremely resilient. I mean, we're still here fighting government, 15, 16 months on. And with the majority, and I say that quite confidently, are still intact. So I don't necessarily think there is going to be a demand issue, provided that we work together.
Michelle, Joe, thank you very, very much indeed for joining me this evening. And hopefully when we speak to you again, it'll be when marquees are back up and running and in private gardens again.